In this video, we will examine why politicians ethically may not rely upon their own uninformed opinion about climate change science. And we will also identify 10 questions that the press should ask these politicians in light of that responsibility. I'm Don Brown, Scholar in Residence, Widener University School of Law. Many politicians have often refused to support policies that would reduce the threat of climate change based upon their own uninformed opinion about the science of climate change. We'll briefly look at two of them. Recently, United States Senator Marco Rubio from Florida was asked about whether he would support policies on climate change. This is what he said.
First of all, the climate's always changing. That's not the fundamental question. The fundamental question is whether man-made activity is what's contributing most to it. And I understand that people say there's a significant scientific consensus on that issue, but I've actually seen reasonable debate on that principle. But beyond it,
despite a very strong consensus on climate science, Senator James Inhofe from Oklahoma distinguishes himself among all politicians who are climate skeptics by claiming that the entire body of climate science is a hoax.
That man-made gases are causing catastrophic global warming may well be the greatest hoax ever perpetrated on the American people.
Ordinary citizens are perfectly free to form their own opinions about climate change science, but government officials are different. Government officials, unlike ordinary citizens, are being told by scientists that their constituents or their governments are causing great harm to people around the world. And so government officials are different than ordinary citizens. Once the government official is put on notice by reasonable scientific evidence that his constituents are causing great harm, politicians may not appeal to his or her own uninformed opinion as justification for not taking action. The government official is like the railroad official who has been told by his employees, who are in the best position to know the position of the company's trains, that there's a runaway train hurtling toward a bus full of children that is stuck on the track, in a case in which the official has the ability to divert the train onto a track on which no humans are located. In the case of climate change, the government official has been told by 97 out of every 100 scientists that actually do peer-reviewed scientific research relating to climate change, and in the United States by the most prestigious scientific organizations, including the United States Academy of Sciences, that greenhouse gases coming from his constituents threaten catastrophic harm not only to his constituents, but to millions of people around the world. 4 times, the United States Academy of Sciences has issued reports saying that climate change is real and human-caused. Every Academy of Science in the world supports the consensus view that climate change is human-caused and catastrophic harms will be caused by business as usual. And so the government official is being told by the most prestigious scientific organizations that his constituents are causing great harm around the world. Although there are some differences among some mainstream scientists about some of the details of the consensus view, an open letter from the American Association for the Advancement of Sciences, which was endorsed by 18 of the most prestigious scientific organizations in the United States, summed up the nature of the consensus. That open letter said, as you consider climate change legislation, we, as leaders of scientific organizations, write to state the consensus scientific view. Observation throughout the world make it clear that climate change is occurring, and rigorous scientific research demonstrates that the greenhouse gases emitted by human activities are the primary driver. These conclusions are based upon multiple independent lines of evidence, and contrary assertions are inconsistent with an objective assessment of the vast body of peer-reviewed science. One recent study found that 13,926 peer-reviewed studies support the consensus view, and that only 24 did not support the consensus view. The government official can't rely upon his own uninformed opinion because the scientists are telling him that emissions from his constituents or his governments are not only harming people in the United States, but hundreds of millions of people around the world and their ecological systems on which their life depends. The United States politicians not only have duties to prevent harm to their constituents, they also have duties to prevent harm to people and places outside the United States. The United States expressly agreed when it ratified the United Nations Framework Convention in 1992 to something called the no harm principle, which is stated here from the convention. That principle says each nation has the responsibility to ensure that activities within their jurisdiction or country do not cause damage to the environment of people beyond the limits of national jurisdiction. It is obvious that the opinions on which some of the politicians are relying are clearly uninformed opinions because the positions they're stating are either lies about the science or reckless disregard for the truth. The claim of Inhofe that the entire science of climate change is a hoax is patently absurd, given the prestigious institutions that support the consensus view. The claim relied upon by Rubio that there's no evidence of human causation is also demonstratively false. The claim that there is not sufficient evidence of human causation is demonstratively false. This chart shows multiple independent lines of evidence of human causation called fingerprint studies. There are also multiple lines of studies called attribution studies that point to human causation. There is multiple chemical and physical lines of evidence that point to human causation. It is also well known that greenhouse gases are appearing in the atmosphere in direct proportion to fossil fuel use, and that the greenhouse gases are fossil carbon, not natural carbon. The responsibility of the politicians to abide by what the mainstream scientists are saying must also be understood in the context of the emergency that the consensus view is articulating about the need to rapidly reduce emissions. This chart shows that we're literally running out of time to prevent catastrophic warming. The chart shows the gap between the emissions reductions that would be required to prevent 2 degrees C warming and the emissions reductions that have been committed to by nations so far, including the United States. Summing up, we're running out of time to prevent catastrophic warming. Responsible skepticism in science is a good thing which should be encouraged, but politicians are basing their opinions upon lies about the science or reckless disregard for the truth. Therefore, the press has a duty to ask these politicians certain questions to determine the nature of their opinion. The press is failing to ask the politicians questions that they should be asking. The press should ask politicians that oppose policies on climate change a series of questions. The questions would be designed to determine whether the politician was actually relying upon their own uninformed opinion. Question number 1, for instance, would be, what specific scientific references and sources do you rely upon to conclude that there's a reasonable scientific dispute about whether human actions are causing climate change? On the website ethicsandclimate.org, one can find 9 other questions that the press should ask politicians who oppose policies on climate change on scientific basis. The website article entitled "Why Politicians May Not Ethically Rely Upon Their Uninformed Opinion" contains these specific questions designed to determine whether the politician is relying upon uninformed opinion. Hopefully, we have demonstrated why politicians may not rely upon their own personal, uninformed opinions about the science of climate change as justification for not supporting policies to reduce the threat of climate change. In a new book, Climate Change Ethics, Navigating the Perfect Moral Storm, I set out other ethical issues that are raised by scientific uncertainty about climate change.